Events happen that change our lives. Dealing with change is what we do. We discuss with industry professionals objective solutions to work through cherished items and family memories. When we go beyond the gavel, we provide tools and information to deal with these crisis times. Hi, welcome to Beyond the Gavel. Today we're here with John Coffey with Consortium Insurance. And John is my insurance man, I am proud to say. And the reason that I invited him here today to talk a little bit about what happened in our life and what could happen in your life as far as business and commercial lines of insurance. So we had a little, John, thank you for coming out. And we really appreciate you coming out on such short notice. So we had a little smoke issue at our building, last week. And it was pretty scary because the first thing we did was call your Consortium. Consortio. Okay, Consortio. So the first thing we did was call Consortio Insurance and talk to your partner, who is also your father, and he was delightful. And he kind of walked us through the steps of what was going to happen and what we could expect and who was going to have to pay for the damage, because smoke does a lot of damage. We didn't have much, thank goodness. But I've never really talked to you about insurance, and I know we have insurance and on our building, and I'd like you to go through some of the insurance needs that maybe people don't think about, and why you walk in with one of these. And I go, oh, here we go. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about commercial lines.
Well, when you insure a building and you're a landlord, so you have a building, that's a very sizable investment for many people, and so they want to make sure they are protected. And part of that is the bank requires due to financing, and other times it's just good business practice. If that investment burns up, gets hit by lightning or what have you, or you have a theft, you want to make sure you're covered, and insurance provides that need. That fulfills that need. So the idea is for insurance is make sure that the building is valued appropriately. And then from there, there's a premium that's charged for that. And it covers not only the physical, but also the general liability. Anybody that slips and falls on the premises as well are the two main risks that are covered by and addressed by an insurance policy.
Sure. So with a building that has tenants, I have the insurance policy, and each one of them has an insurance policy. And should I be named on that insurance policy as the company that owns the building?
That's exactly right. So when you have, as the landlord, you cover the outside structure, if you will, and then the tenants will cover the inside walls, whatever is inside. So it could be their equipment, it could be their machines, whatever their operations are. They're responsible, and that's what your lease outlines. It says you're responsible for your insurance inside the walls, and then you'll provide the insurance outside the walls, the roof, and the physical structure itself. And then, so when you set that up, you want to be named on the tenant's insurance policy as the landlord as an additional insured to their policy. And then you'll get a certificate of insurance each and every year that's updated that reflects that you are named, and you'll specify in your lease certain limits that you want your tenants to carry as well for insurance, and that's just a part of the lease itself.
Okay, so if I am the named company, co-insured on their policy, I should get a copy of that every year.
Yeah,
so they've renewed. And
so the certificate of insurance demonstrates almost that there is insurance in place, and it's just kind of a standard industry form that they provide that just outlines who the carrier is, what are the dates of the insurance policy, what are the limits, and it's named you as the landlord as the additional insured on that policy. So every year you'll require to get that.
Okay, so if I have a social hall and someone wants to have an event down there, for example, we have the Ben's Garden Club plant sale every year, and they always provide a certificate of co-insurance for me.
Right.
So you should have that for every wedding, every...
Ideally, you would like to have that for every person that rents your hall. You would have them to have some liability insurance as well. And so it's, in your terms of agreement, you'll have to specify what you would like to have.
Sure.
As, your to carry a general liability policy. That's what you'd like.
And it can be 2 or 3 days if someone is going to rent a space. It can be a 2 or 3 day policy. Like I might want to
Like
be
a wedding.
A wedding or at a trade show. I might want to have a booth at a trade show, and for several years they've been asking for you to provide co-insurance as well.
Right.
So
I just want to correct you. Co-insurance is actually a specific insurance
Okay.
term. So you want to use certificate of insurance.
Thank
That's
you.
what you want to do.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification, because again, that's why you're here. John, that's why you're here. Because I don't maybe understand as much as I should on the insurance end. I know I need it and I know I should have it. So let's talk about the certificate of insurance, where I am the
additional
insured. That's what I would like to have for everybody that rents, and probably everybody in Omaha would like to have that for everybody that rents their space or
Yes,
is there for a trade
that's
show.
what we would recommend, is
Okay.
that if they have a tenant, that they make sure, and it's a commercial space, that they have insurance. Because you, as the landlord, are not going to be responsible, nor do you know how much value their personal property is in that space. One tenant could have, it could be just kind of a storage space, and the next tenant, it could have a very high-tech equipment in there.
Sure.
And so the values of those two, you wouldn't have any idea. So it's the responsibility of the tenant itself to provide that insurance and cover their own stuff that they have.
Sure. And then just to have me on this certificate as well. So if I wanted to insure my building and know that if there was a catastrophic event, I have employees that I wouldn't want to lose, how do I handle that? Is that a different type?
Well, that is. And so let's just say you, a little different in your scenario, but let's just say you had a business that owned a building, and like a manufacturing building.
Sure.
And the manufacturing, you had employees, and the event that let's say there was a fire that shut the building down. And so now you're faced with, oh my gosh, I've just lost, could be your business.
Sure.
And then the second thing you just come up with is, I'm responsible for all these people for their livelihoods, and how do I handle that? How do I face them and say it's going to be okay? And that's where insurance really comes in. And if you have a good insurance policy and a good agent, that's where it's their time to shine.
Sure.
And so there is a type of coverage called business interruption insurance, or business income insurance. And so that is what you want to have, because it'll cover you for lost profits, it'll cover you for your continuing payroll, and it'll cover you for any legally obligated expenses as well. And so that could be for 12 months, and it could be, or you could provide a limit for how much you'd want to cover.
Sure.
And so that's a tricky calculation for some businesses, because they haven't really gone through that disaster planning and contingency planning of saying, what if this place burned down? What am I going to do? Is there a second location that I would use? Is there, what employees would I want to have there, that are mission critical, and what employees that, they'll just naturally kind of find another job.
Migrate into something
they'll
else,
find
yes.
something else. But you want to make sure that, business interruption insurance would provide all that coverage, and indeed it does. But if you aren't paying attention, or you don't have someone that's unfamiliar with that, then it becomes a problem.
Well, and sometimes I think, for me, I don't take the time to understand all of it because I'm so busy in the business.
Right.
And it does make a difference if you have time to just sit down and talk about it and what your needs are today.
It's very much
in the future.
a conversation, and then also going through those what ifs. And so for a landlord, you're not so much worried about business interruption like we just described as a manufacturing plant. You're worried about all these tenants, and they can't pay any of their rent because
Correct.
the building, let's just say, was unoccupied. You couldn't occupy it, and so now you're out of rent, but you still have to meet your obligations, and so you're covering loss of rent, and that's what that business interruption would cover.
Oh, that's
you.
important.
So that policy structured so it would capture that. So you got to make sure that the policy will pick up the, You have to kind of look at your rent rolls and decide, do the rent rolls match the limit that we have, and is that sufficient or not? And
Sure.
how long would it take for you to reconstruct the building? Would it take 12 months? Would it take 18 months? And then make sure that the limit corresponds to that as well.
Well, and that's for me to reconstruct the building, but for them to reconstruct their portion, the tenants, it may take longer. Contractors are very busy right now.
Absolutely.
So if you think about that, trying to get somebody in to rebuild your whole offices space and your spaces could take a lot longer than you thought.
Well, it does, and many people, when they look around their offices and they see desks and cubicles and computers, and they're like, oh, we can get those secondhand, maybe from an auction company.
Sure.
But if they're particular, or they want them to match all, or they want them to be new, then at that point, it's not, you can get them secondhand. You'll have to go to a company that sells office furniture
Sure.
and purchase that right then and there. And so the cost between brand new furniture and secondhand furniture is sizable.
Yes.
And so you want to make sure your insurance policy reflects that as well, that you have contemplated picking up brand new furniture versus, oh, I've got these desks and cubicles right around and I can pick those up anytime.
Sure.
Well, you can pick those up anytime except when you really need them, and then all of a sudden it becomes a larger expense than you expect.
Yeah, they get real expensive when you need them, when there's so many around, and we've had that happen as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking to someone about commercial lines and it's the first time that you've talked to them, what are you going to touch on? Because the first thing they're going to ask you is, why is it so expensive?
Right. Well, and they do, but our approach is a little different. We decide when we talk to a prospective company, we want to understand their business first. So it's kind of like a doctor walking into a patient room and they say, well, I know you need to have this shot and you need to have this test. No, you don't even, doctor hasn't taken any time to learn about you and
Sure.
your symptoms and what have you. So that's what we're trying to do, is understand what your business does and understand some of the risks associated with that, and by asking questions and drawing that out. And some of those questions you might not have thought about or maybe haven't even addressed for a long, long time, such as, do you have a disaster plan? It's something we put together, and it was about 8-10 years ago. Well, has your business changed? Oh yeah, we've grown, we've done that, we've added a whole new section in our warehouse, and we've expanded plants and all.
Sure.
Well, then you probably need to update that as well to reflect that. And likewise with insurance, if it's many people, it's an expense, as you mentioned. It's not broke, don't fix it. They've got other things to address with their time because they're stretched. But it is something that is a great time to talk about when you don't have the stress of a catastrophic event, because that's the wrong time to start talking about insurance, is when you have a catastrophic event.
And that's what we talk about on all our shows, is trying to be prepared before something happens so that everybody's life is not in turmoil and you have all the things happen that you've mentioned.
Exactly. So you go and talk and understand the business, and then from there you start asking about some of their, do they own the building? Do they lease the space? What are the requirements? And then you start talking about their customers and their vendors, and understanding from there, what do they do? And maybe you have a scenario where they have a sole sourced vendor. So they have one single vendor that supplies them with a critical part. And so then what happens if that vendor goes down?
Sure.
There's actually insurance, so nothing happened to you.
Yeah.
Your building is terrific. But if you can't get a critical part, if you're a manufacturer, for example, and the sole supplier catches a fire, and this happens quite a bit in like the pharmaceutical industry. There's like one plant that does, generates a particular pharmaceutical, and then you're depending on that, and then all of a sudden it's no longer.
Sure.
So then you have a long lead time before it's shifted to production to somewhere else. And in the meantime, you're at a standstill. You can't generate any money because you can't sell your product. So there's coverage for that.
There's coverage for everything.
There is.
You just have to ask.
But you have to ask, because that is something that, for the most part, most people don't understand or don't take the time to understand the business. And so that's a commonly missed type
Sure.
of coverage. And there's a number of, in probably most relevant in 2019 were the floods in Nebraska.
They've been delightful.
And so everyone has a story of someone that is connected to, or maybe they experienced their flood
Sure.
itself. And flood is not a covered peril under most policies. So there is coverage under a separate flood policy, but insurance companies have always had a special coverage for flood. And so that is when you start looking at your policies, well, what caused the damage? What caused the loss? In this case, if it was a flood and you declined it, or your agent, you said, oh, we're too far up, or that the dam will never break, or whatever, the levees are going to be strong, and there's a loss, then that's a very difficult conversation to have with your customer, because they seem to forget that they were offered flood, hopefully,
Sure.
and then they declined it because it was an extra expense, and flood will never happen, and so on and so forth. And the other thing is that for flood, there's a 30-day waiting period, because
Oh, perfect.
they have kind of caught on, insurance companies have caught on that floods, you can anticipate when potential flood may happen. And so they wait 30 days before the flood policy is in effect. And so again, it's just kind of going through and walking through some of these questions and
Sure.
saying what's your risk and how much do you want to self-insure as a company, and how much do you want to transfer that risk through an insurance policy.
Sure. Well, and all of those items, all the added things are going to cost a little bit more. But if I was in a low-lying area, I would certainly think if there was a creek in my backyard, then the last couple of years I would need to have had flood insurance before all this happened, because it's been a terrible event.
Well, it has, and so many times the financial institution is the one that's requiring it, and so if they're out of a floodplain, then the companies believe, oh, I'm scot-free, and so they don't take the flood. And because they thought, well, I don't need it because no one's
Sure.
requiring it. Well, it's not just because you're required to have flood, should you buy it. You ought to consider that if you're proximity to a creek or a river or something like that.
Yeah,
And that becomes a problem.
makes certain sense. What about, we all know hail damage because everybody's familiar with that in Nebraska on their homes. What other kinds of damage is there? We don't really have earthquakes.
No, we don't have earthquakes, but let's just go back to hail for a moment. As experienced in Nebraska for the last several years, there have been major hailstorms that have rolled through, and those insurance companies that have been here in Nebraska and insuring customers have taken many losses as a result of the hailstorms. And so carriers, insurance carriers, are now instituting a separate wind and hail deductible. So your deductible might be, $1,000 for your business insurance, but a wind and hail deductible might be $10,000. So it's a way that the companies can kind of insulate themselves a little bit and protect themselves because they've taken so many losses. And I think you see that on your personal insurance as well. Most personal insurance, you're seeing different wind and hail deductibles.
Absolutely.
And so that's a surprise to some. And then the other thing that we try to avoid is a percentage deductible, which would be maybe 1 or 2% of the building value would be your deductible,
Ooh.
which can get expensive. And so we like to have just a flat deductible.
Oh,
So deductibles we're seeing for wind and hail, depending on the size of the building, range anywhere from that, 5,000, 10,000, up to the 100,000 plus, So
that's a lot.
it could be a bigger building there.
That's a lot. Well, it would be nice if Nebraska weather would settle down a little bit, but it changes on the hour.
It seems like it, yes.
Yeah, we have a gal up that we know from Arkansas, and she said, I thought our weather was changing fast, but Nebraska's is amazing.
So that's why when people ask why are insurance premiums going up, that's one of the reasons why is that all these hailstorms, these weather-related events, even if they're not here in Nebraska, all these insurance carriers kind of factor that in. And then the probability of something happening in the state that's part of their factors that they come up to a rate, and that's how they arrive at that.
I'm sure. What other things can you talk about today about commercial lines that maybe we don't think about?
Well, probably one of the biggest claims that we're seeing that's emerging is something related to the cyber liability side of things. So
Oh.
cyber liability is as you can imagine, technology moves much quicker than insurance policies. So insurance policies haven't really caught up to have a cyber coverage built into the regular policy. So what they've done is develop separate and distinct cyber policies. And cyber policies have been around maybe 10, 15 years now, and each and every year they get a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit better. There's no standard cyber policy, but what that'll do is that'll cover you as if there was a breach, you're required in each state to notify those customers that were impacted by a breach.
Sure.
And I'm sure we've all received those letters before that says, I think there's a breach, just want you to know, and if you'd like, we'll pay for some credit monitoring service.
Sure.
And you have to sign up if you feel if you feel that you might have been breached, or you want to watch your credit, what's going on with that. So that policy, the cyber policy, will actually pay for that.
Oh,
and they will actually, it's almost like a plug and play, and many people buy that for that particular reason alone, is that they don't want to mess with, see, you have to notify all your customers in the state that they reside, and you have to follow those laws in the state that they reside. So each state has different cyber policies. We have no federal uniform policy about notification. We have no federal policy that says this is how you notify. Is it through email? Is it certified mail? How many times? We don't have any of that. So each state is different. So the insurance companies have all got that research already go, and so it's a plug and play.
Sure.
And they have that. Now, taking cyber a little bit further, and some of the emergent claims that we're seeing right now, two in particular, and they're called social engineering. I think there's some others that they have different terminology, but social engineering would be if an employee of Auction Solutions received an email, allegedly, from Shane that said, I'd like you to wire some funds to this particular vendor. And so they go ahead and do that. Well, so they didn't check with you, and they just were a dutiful employee, and they just sent it out without questioning, without asking. And so they send the money out willfully, and that's the key difference. So the cyber thieves have been a little bit more sophisticated, and they're getting smarter, and so they will intercept if you send a reply email back that says, are you sure you want me to do this? And they'll respond back, absolutely, and that's it. And so that is willfully giving up your funds, which at that point, that's different than a crime policy, where a crime policy, someone steals your money, well, you gave it up. And so that was not covered by a crime policy. This is now in the realm of the social engineering. And so that has become a very popular claim that we're seeing. And if you don't have cyber policy, your normal policies will not cover that. In addition, another particular emergent claim in that same area is called ransomware or cyber extortion, what have you.
Oh yes, I've experienced that firsthand.
Right, so that is the scenario where bad guys get a hold of your server, get a hold of your system, and they say, okay, we've got the keys to the kingdom, and we are going to shut it down unless you deposit X amount of Bitcoins in our account by Thursday noon. And so they usually give some sort of demonstration that they actually have, they've taken it over.
Yep.
And so they encrypt everything.
They do.
And they encrypt everything,
and
then you have the cost of trying to rebuild everything. And so particularly if you didn't back it up or what have you. And so we have seen healthcare institutions that have been impacted by that. We've seen other institutions, other businesses that have been impacted by that as well. And so the cyber policy is ever expanding, and so each year it kind of evolves, and that picks that up as well. So those are some things that are not covered under your, I'll call your typical general liability policy. It's now covered under a cyber policy.
Right, we were hacked, and someone also has one of my business checks out there. So we got a call from someone who had received a check for $94,000, and it was written on an account that keeps very little money in it. And he called us and asked if we would honor it, and we were like, yeah, no. So they sent a 53,000 and a 62 and a 91, and one guy fell for it, and he cashed that check, and he kept his 15%. And then he called us and says, "Oh, I'm out. What should I do? Can you help me?"
Right.
I said, "Well, no, there's no money in that account,
Right.
so we can't help you." But that's happening every day.
It is, and so that the cyber thieves are more and more sophisticated, and so there is employee education that you need to do, and you need to use common sense. We have a tendency of just doing everything email, and we're not getting up out of our office and walking or picking the phone up and saying, "Did you really send me this email?" And we even had a small firm that recently had this scenario happen with social engineering, where they had the bank locked down, they had policies in place, and the employee just did it anyhow because they were just trying to be, they were relatively new to the organization, and
Yeah.
they were trying to be eager beaver and whatever. And then probably the last scenario in that whole kind of gamut of social engineering and cyber crime are these gift cards. And
Oh, yeah.
the gift cards I don't quite understand it, but they're very sophisticated because there'll be an email that says, "Hey, would you please go get some gift cards for the party, for Christmas party, holiday party, whatever." And so they go ahead and do that. And then the thieves somehow, and that's usually an email. And you see these emails, if you looked at the actual address, there's probably one letter or something that's quite off. It looks like an L, it should be an I, but you just kind of look at it really quick, and so you say, "Oh yeah, it looks legit." So they get the gift cards, and then they somehow say, flip it to text, and they say, "Let's talk text," okay? And then they ask you, "Could you tell me what the card number is?" So they scratch it out, and they take a picture, and they send the text, and as soon as that happens, that card is drained. And again, that's a uncovered loss under a regular general liability policy, and under the cyber policy, it'd be covered.
Wow.
But again, it's sort of common sense of talking to your employees and say, "Now look, if I'm asking you to go get gift cards, that red lights should be going out and horns flashing. This is some sort of, you're being duped, and,
Sure.
and don't act on it."
Well, John Coffey, I so much appreciate you coming out here. John is with Consortio Group. Give him a call. He has great insurance information. Thank you very much for coming out today.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it.